a regulatory perspective?
No, it's happened a few times. It's recording, but for some reason it wouldn't go onto YouTube.
Okay.
Anyway,
no
so yeah, it's recorded. The meeting is being recorded, so we can always put it on afterwards.
Okay, no problem. In that case, it's 4:01, so I suggest we get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Rural Matters Advisory Panel this afternoon. A particular welcome to Rob Rich and to Inspector Tanya Beckett, who are joining us for the rural security item. So welcome to you both. And to Amanda, of course, and to Phil Merrick. We haven't seen you at this meeting, this panel so much, Phil, so it's good to see you.
Thank you. Pleased to join you.
Great. Can I just remind everyone, although we are not live on YouTube, we are being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube later. In light of recent events, can I suggest, therefore, that you keep your microphones on mute unless you wish to speak, to avoid any unforeseen or unwanted comments being inadvertently broadcast to the wider public. I'll say no more on that at this point in time. Tracy, have we got any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor David Wilkinson, Co-optee David Brotheridge, officers Jem Teal and Fred Davis.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, can I offer Elaine Salter's apologies as well?
Yep, absolutely, Stephen, thank you.
And Chris Brooksis, sorry, he's on a call at the moment with Penelope Bossum over estates, which may come relevant to some of the discussions later on.
Right, okay, very helpful, thank you. Will you be joining us later then, Phil?
I don't think so.
Okay, no problem. In which case that takes us on to item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations that we need to record? Not seeing any, no, okay. So notes the last meeting then. So those were circulated after the last meeting. I know 18th of November feels a very long time ago now for many of us, but hopefully you had a chance to look at those notes. Are there any comments, first of all, on those notes from an accuracy perspective? No. Any matters arising that would not otherwise be covered within this meeting?
Chair, I think Councillor Rowley was indicating.
Oh, apologies, Tony.
Yeah, it's got me down as present on the notes on the minutes, but then it gives my apologies. Do you put everybody down as present and then do apologies?
No, not normally. Were you at the meeting, Tony?
No.
No. Okay, I'll make a note of that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. Good spot. Any matters arising from those notes that we need to address? No. Okay. In which case we will go on then to the next item, which is messages from the Executive Board. Tony, Chris, which of you wishes to go first?
I'm happy to go first if Chris wants me to.
I certainly do, Tony. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony.
Seems a long time since the Executive Board met. This is the actual Executive Board itself, which we met on the 16th of December prior to the public Exec Board, which met on the 6th of January. In terms of the last time we met and the messages coming from there, we had a presentation actually from David Wilkinson as chair of the planning committee. Particularly it seemed relevant in this COVID world that we're in and virtual meetings. It seemed appropriate that we discuss how the planning committee is working and the links between the planning committee and the executive, which is clearly through myself as portfolio holder. So it was a very good presentation between David and Holly as the director. And we discussed many issues of how the planning committee may work, continue to work and work better in this virtual world, which seems to be going on much longer than we originally anticipated. Obviously, certain issues were eventually going to the exec board public meeting, but if I can just go through those, we had obviously the outcome of the Wychavon grant funding and awards, and quite a decent discussion actually on those, and reflected what many members' views were on those. And I think there seemed to be a consensus throughout the member surveys to where we go with the certainly the funding and the awards. And I thought the outcome from that was good, and obviously continued through to the public board meeting. Chris presented a paper on rural lettings policy, which is obviously a big issue at the moment, particularly relevant, again, coming back to planning. Many issues about the rural lettings policies in relation to specific sites that come forward for planning to the planning committee, and the views of parish councils as to how the rural letting policy does impact on planning decision making. And Chris may wish to expand a little bit on that. We talked about the Worcester 6 business park, the infrastructure investment, which again went to the executive board, and the important role it is to invest in the rural economy in terms of infrastructure, and indeed the payback that we get as an authority by investing in things like Worcester 6 infrastructure. I don't think there's any other messages that actually came back from the board, Chris, unless you've got anything to add.
I haven't. I mean, I was, unfortunately, we've not had the minutes of that meeting yet, but I think that, as I recall, there were no specific messages. And I agree with what Tony was saying. It's worth, if you're so interested, to have a look at the paper about rural lettings, but essentially it is about trying to make sure that the local parishes have a go first, if you like, to put people who are in the local villages into affordable housing that's being built. And if there's nobody in the village, say Ombersley or Doverdale, in our case, we've got a combined parish that's looked after by one parish council, then it's the neighbouring parishes that are looked at next. And then finally, in what is about an 8-week period, at about week 5, if there's nobody in neighbouring districts or neighbouring parishes either, or neighbouring wards, I should say, then it would then move to the whole of Wychavon. So we're trying to make sure that process is well understood by everybody, and that it's also understood and acted upon by platform and rooftop going forward. But to my mind, it seemed to make a lot of sense in hopefully diffusing some of the feedback we've had in the past, that it's people are coming from out of the district to be housed. Yeah, I think those were I think Tony's covered all of the other key messages that I can recall. I mean, the only other thing I would mention, simply because I'm on the board of Wychavon Leisure, we are continuing to support Wychavon Leisure, but unfortunately, because of the lockdown, none of the leisure centres are currently open, but we're doing everything we can to make sure that they will be able to, they'll be ready and raring to go when things pick up again.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Tony. I was going to just reference that rural lettings policy, which, as you know, obviously we would have seen going to the executive board last week, and we were all there. And I didn't ask the question at the exec board, but it would be helpful to understand what level of reporting we could expect to see coming out of the policy. Clearly, the structure of it is very reasonably straightforward. So one would hope that certainly at a sort of a council-wide level, but even potentially at a ward level, we'll be able to see sort of the number of lettings that do go to someone with a direct ward connection or neighbouring parishes, and then sort of just get a sense of how many are dropping down the stages, as it were, in the policy, and perhaps to get a view from you, either Chris or from Stephen, as to the sort of frequency with which it would be appropriate for us to see some of that reporting.
It's a good point. I certainly think that is something we should make sure we make transparent. I'm fully in favour. I'm sure we'll do it. Stephen, I'm not sure how frequently. That's the, what would seem appropriate would be once a quarter or once every 6 months. Stephen's on.
Sorry, I couldn't get my mute button off. That's £1 to a charity. Yes, Chris, I'd agree with you. It's every quarter would be useful, in line with the work that we're doing with our housing association colleagues as well. So yeah, I'd say quarterly we could bring something back.
Yeah.
Okay. And would that be something we could have back here, Stephen? Given our interest in rural housing, is that something? I mean, it might be that there might be a more appropriate forum from a council perspective, but certainly I think we'd be interested.
I mean, there are council groups that we take the performance indicators to. Yes, I mean, I think on the rural lettings angle, there's definitely a need, I think, for us to report back to this panel on how we're performing on some of the targets. So we can pull together a small dashboard that will be relevant to this work, to this panel.
Thanks,
okay. I guess it wasn't so much sort of performance indicators in the high level sense in terms of a target, but more just a sense of how for each ward, you know, where there are properties available, how many are going to people with a local connection to that ward, how many are going to the next parish, how many are going to going wider, just so we get a sense of how that's fluctuating, because it will also inform some of the conversations I think that did come up at the executive board about local need. If we regularly if our reporting is showing that in an individual ward that regularly there isn't a local someone with local connection that is actually next in line and therefore potentially being placed in the house, having individual instances isn't enough. But if we're seeing a pattern of that happening, then that would indicate that perhaps there isn't a substantial local need in that parish for further social housing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll speak with the strategy enabling team, and we will pull together a report that we can bring back that captures that information.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. Any questions for Chris and Tony from the exec board perspective? No. Okay, in which case we'll go on to item 5, which is rural security. So I don't know who's going to lead on this. Amanda, are you kicking us off?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Happy to. And I think probably just a question back in relation to the exec board is I've had an email hot off the press from Cherry Mansfield in relation to amending our existing council promise, which was about working with partners to reduce crimes most affecting our district through supporting communities, delivering education and awareness campaigns, coordinating community days of action and property marking events and road safety campaigns across the district, to encompassing cybercrime, data security, ID theft, banking scams, etc. And that's something I'd welcome a little bit more context in from executive board members for the rationale for that, because I'd welcome a conversation about both the evidence and the impact. And maybe I can address that a little bit in this presentation, so that can be part of the discussion at the end. So segueing me into the presentation, thank you. Those of you that will recall, we first came to you in July 2019 and did an update with this regard, and then again in March 2020. Oh, how times have changed. It feels like a very different place to what it did in March 2020 in particular. I'm really pleased that for the first time we've got our police partner here with us today. So Inspector Tina Beckett. Tanya is I think I said Tina, sorry Tanya. Tanya's and her police colleagues are very much valued partners in the work that we do, and collaboration is the key. Particularly in relation to asset-based approaches to tackling community safety matters across both districts. For the presentation, what I'll endeavour to do is to give a little bit of an overview as to the service and the team, give you a bit of an update in terms of activity to date, and then also acknowledge the impact that both flooding and COVID has had on the delivery of the service, and then do a little bit of looking ahead in terms of future aspirations for the service and how it can meet with the council promises. And thereafter then maybe we can have a bit of a question and answer session and bring in other partners. Tracy, are you happy for me to give you the nod to move on? Thank you. So in terms of the shared service, there are three sort of strategic functions of the shared service. One is to provide strategic community safety role. Second one is to have operational responsibility for community safety and environmental protection. And the third fundamental role is around enforcement with regard to community safety and environmental protection. We set up the service level agreement back in September 2017. That came to an end in October last year. Obviously, we've been responding in a very dynamic situation with regard to COVID. So it's been agreed that we're operating on a rolling basis. So there is a need for a review, and I think the timing's right for the review in terms of what it is both councils want moving forward. The cost of the service to Wychavon District Council is a management fee of £15,000 per annum. Thank you, Tracy. So to give you a little bit of a structure diagram, we've got a small team equating to approximately 2 to 3 full-time equivalent officers. That's specific resources within Wychavon. I think the added value of the shared service is the expertise that we can draw across both councils working collaboratively. So although, as the diagram reflects, is that those in the blue are employed by Malvern Hills District Council, those in purple are a shared service across both districts, and the orange, for want of a better description, that's dedicated solely to Wychavon. The very nature of how the team functions is that actually we work across boundaries, that actually it's about how we support each other to support the communities that we're serving. And I think in terms of, I'm hoping that as elected members, you've seen the value to that in terms of how we work to support the needs that your communities are expressing to you. And certainly, I'm sure the police colleagues and Tanya would echo her own experience in terms of working with us and her local policing teams. Thanks, Tracy. So a whistle-stop tour, if you like, in terms of activity to date, in response actually to COVID, we saw a significant increase in bike theft. So we responded to that dynamically by putting a number of bike marking events in place. Again, working collaboratively with our police colleagues to promote this. For Wychavon, we've had over 100 bikes that have been marked over a number of different locations across the district. It's fair to say that the feedback from those that have received this free of charge service has been excellent. We've also seen a significant decrease in the number of thefts in our district. You won't be surprised to know that a significant number of thefts have been taking place in this Worcester City, but obviously there was a risk, of course, within our districts too. We've had increased patrols, again, working with the local policing team and our colleagues from Parks Department in terms of ensuring compliance with the public open space protection in Evesham, where we've had persistent and ongoing ASB problems. That patrol included our very own Phil Merrick. So Phil was out late one night on a Saturday night with one of our colleagues, Elliot Nixon, and no doubt Phil will have his own story to tell in terms of how that was eye-opening for him as an experience. We've been effectively deploying CCTV units. We've had 8 that have been deployed. For information, we've had 2 that are currently in Droitwich that are addressing both county lines and antisocial behaviour. We've got 2 at the bypass at Norton and Kemsey to address car cruising issues that we've got in that locality. It is worth noting that Wychavon's getting great value for money on this because 4 of the cameras, of which we've got 5 in total, are owned by Malvern Hills District Council, but a high proportion of those cameras are being deployed in Wychavon because we're responding to where the need is. Thanks, Trace. We've commissioned some work using PCC funding, so Police and Crime Commissioner funding, to get some performances to promote and raise awareness of child sexual exploitation. So engagement was really positive on this, and we managed to get De Montfort, Prince Henry's and Pershore high schools all positively engaged. We know that we've got a particular issue in the Evesham locality with regard to county lines, so that was certainly a priority for us. We're looking to do similar sort of engagement moving forward. Obviously, COVID has restricted us somewhat, but I think in terms of how we change attitudes, have behaviour changes, and raise it as issues within our schools so it can become part of a conversation is really important. And that's certainly reflected by the feedback that we've had from teachers in particular. You probably won't be surprised to note that we've seen an increase in environmental reports and particularly fly tipping. Now, fly tipping is particularly damaging, isn't it, on our communities, not only in terms of it being a blight on the community and the landscape, but the impact it can have, and also the cost of clearance. So this is an area of work that we're really keen to clamp down on, for want of a better expression. And we're only going to do that by raising awareness of people's duty of care responsibilities, and also by working collaboratively with partners. And I'll talk a little bit later around the Scrap campaign and about how we can amplify the exposure to that across our communities. In terms of our response, we've deployed 8 trail cameras, we've issued 9 fixed penalty notices, 8 community protection notices, 29 information requests. So the team are working really hard to ensure that we apply effective enforcement where we need to. So, you know, we want to be a district, don't we, where, you know, we've got nil fly tipping, and we've got a hardline response to those that do fly tip. And I mean, part of that kind of fits into our 4 E's approach, which I've mentioned to you at previous presentations, where it's around education, engagement, empowerment, and enforcement as a last resort. But we know certainly for serious organised crimes that exist, that enforcement needs to be at the forefront of our response to this. In terms of We Alert, this is a really important community watch scheme that the local policing team have put in place. Probably the best showcase in terms of the impact is feedback that we've had from Boots the Chemist, that have said it's been fundamental in an uplift in prosecuting and deterring shoplifters. And that's certainly taking place in Evesham and across the board. And we know that the cost to businesses in terms of theft can be significant. Tanya's reported that one store alone was losing up to £10,000 a week through theft. So any impact with that regard has been significant. And I think for us, this is one part of that wider community watch concept about how we encourage communities themselves to have eyes and ears. Thanks, Tracy. Tanya, I thought I'd give you the opportunity to maybe put a little bit of context around some of the work areas on this page.
Right. Hello, everyone. Just found my unmute. Right. Yeah, obviously we all work together in partnership really well. And I think it's fair to say that because I also cover Malvern Hills and Wychavon, it's a really good partnership. OCGs across the area in partnership, we all get together at a regular meeting, our focus group with regard to the OCGs, and also our monthly tasking, which took place this morning, which Elliot attended. And we look at the 4 Ps with regard to the organised crime groups and identify where they are, how they're operating, and take a really proactive response to that all together in partnership. And what else of a context you want around that? I mean, even today I'm aware of a success with regard to that. We've got some really good intelligence coming in, for example, around the Johnsons at Evesham, and we're watching closely and working together with regard to new developments there, and also in Eckington. So just feel we're all in touch and it works really, really well. Scrapyards, targeted patrols, we're trying to do some more of those specifically across the rural. We've always been really successful on the city. So we're expanding that to do some more work. In West Mercia, we've developed a new team called the Harm Hub, or the Problem Solving Hub is their official title. And we have all the right people within that team to look at these issues. So we've got 2 rural crime officers who will look at rural and business crime across the rural sections, particularly in Wychavon. That will include the scrapyards. And they're putting together some good operations. We've also got some covert assets behind us that we can use with regard to any of these operations. And that moves me on really to the Rural Watch, where we've had a real success with creating a WhatsApp group. So it's run by the community. They lead on it. They put intelligence on it. They understand it's not a way in which to report it to the police, but it's a really good method of keeping in touch. And we've got some successes around that, whereby our police officers are part of that group. They'll pick up on things that are being reported now. We're able to get there, and we've had at least 2 successes very recently, including seizures of stolen items and successful arrests, because we've known straight away that it's actually going on now and been able to attend prior to our control room and all it going through that process. So the control room reported it, and we're actually there at the scene dealing with it. So it's really, really good. It's a really good way to communicate within the community. We're going to try and expand that further. And we're also trying to look at poaching as part of that as well, because we appreciate that there's a lot of reports around poaching, and very often it's not just poaching, they're actually using that as a platform to commit further crime. So that's us going forward. I don't know if there's any other further context around that. Amanda?
Thank you, Tanya. Tracy, can you move us on? So, and then I suppose, and in addition to all of that activity, I'd probably categorise what you can see on the screen there as being investment in our people, and that's through their continuous professional development to make sure they've got the tools to effectively do the job and find the right community solutions. Investment in our processes to make sure, again, that that's streamlined and we've got a really good reporting mechanism in place that we can then use that information as intelligence and apply it accordingly. That emphasis again on the education and awareness raising in terms of, particularly with regard to those campaigns and the role that we can play in terms of amplifying that to our communities, working collaboratively with police colleagues and also our own corporate communications team. And I think fundamental to all of this is about that concept of, it's about asset-based working. You know, as a district council in terms of community safety and environmental protection, we're a relatively small team. As a policing team, Tanya will tell you that it's a relatively small team that's being pulled on significant crime responses. So actually within our community, we have to focus on what are the assets within our community that we can work with to ensure that we have safer communities. Tracy? It is worth giving a nod to the impact of flooding and COVID. You know, unfortunately, but understandably, some of the planned activity hasn't taken place due to the impact of those emergencies and the redeployment of resources to respond to that community need. And I think in particular, those multi-agency environmental crime days were really effective in 2019 and the start of 2020. And when we have the opportunity to do so, we'll be really keen to bring that back, because that resulted in some really fantastic enforcement and education and awareness. I think probably what that list does show to you, though, is that it reflects that what you've got is you've got a responsive and flexible workforce. And although it wasn't delivering on some of those specific outcomes that we'd intended to do pre-flooding and COVID, what it does show is that actually it was still responding to community need. And I think that's really important, isn't it? Because it is about the role that we play about meeting the needs of our communities. Thanks, Tracy. And then finally, I suppose I'm kind of categorising this in terms of, you know, as an officer, what's my ask to you as elected members? Well, what comes first is there needs to be that review of the service level agreement that we've had in place for 3 years. And we need to look at that in the context about in terms of, as a council, those corporate priorities and promises, have we got the resources to meet those aspirations in the longer term? And I think also in terms of how does that link into our further strategy development in terms of that connected community strategy, which is around the appliance of that asset-based community development approach and ensuring fundamentally that we're looking to get an outcome of safer communities, working with communities. And I suppose the other element to this is that further amplification of the scrap fly tipping campaign. We've seen success on that campaign, and it's had limited exposure because it's not been invested in to amplify it across the communities. But the mechanisms that we have and the channels that we have used have shown that it's had an impact in terms of reducing fly tipping in localities, working collaboratively with our town and parish councils to educate them, more collaboration with our police colleagues and Environment Agency to find solutions. Tony, you'll no doubt have a very practical example of a significant fly tip issue in your ward that will need to be addressed through a multi-agency approach because it sits on a farmer's land. So to all intents and purposes, it's private property. But absolutely, as a district council, we've got a role to play about how we can encourage those key partners that can provide enforcement to do so. So I suppose my final close is coming back to that comment I made at the start of the presentation with regard to Executive Board asking for a review on the Council's promise in relation to community safety and environmental protection, and wanting to understand the evidence around focusing on cybercrime, data security, ID theft and banking scams. Bearing in mind I only read that 10 minutes ago, my initial reaction to that is, one, what's the evidence? And two, what's the impact that a district council can have with regard to that area of work? Thank you, Chairman. More than happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Amanda. That was very helpful. I think we've got a couple of things to pick up on the fly tipping piece in particular, but before I sort of jump in on with any questions I've got, are there any other questions or comments for the team? Not seeing any hands up, so I'll go first then.
Yeah, I think Councillor Day has his hand up.
Oh,
Alan Anderson.
Thanks.
Okay,
yeah, it was just to respond to Mandy's point about the cybercrime. Where did that come from? So we had a exec board meeting this morning. We have them weekly at the moment, but so this wasn't the formal one, but one of the things that was discussed was the impact that cybercrime is having. And I think obviously it's something that happens in rural areas and in cities and anywhere. Anybody can be a victim of cybercrime. I happen to know of someone who's been a victim in Ombersley and lost a lot of money as a result of it. Why is it important? Well, I think what's the evidence? I think the evidence is that it's obviously increasing generally. And I guess if we were to only focus on physical crime or antisocial behaviour, robbery, vehicle crime, violent crime, those sorts of things, I think we would be potentially missing something. So in relation to the 4 E's or that you were talking about, Mandy, I think education is certainly something that we as a council can do to help explain the risk of cybercrime. We could put that in our next Wychavon quarterly magazine, which I think is often quite well read by people. And we can use other channels, I suppose, to try and do that, use schools as well to try and make sure that people are educated about it. To my mind, and somebody who's worked in the digitalization, if you like, of things for quite a while, it is going to be unfortunately a huge growth area. You can see that already, the number of companies that work in fighting cybercrime, for example. And so I think it's something we're all going to have to work on, and it's a key thing. So that was one thought. The other thought I had was, in terms of sort of considering whether we've got the right size team, whether we've got the right numbers of people fighting things, I think we know that Wychavon is a low crime area, at least that's what I'm told. And so in some ways it's difficult to advocate for more resources unless we can be quite clear that we've got a problem, or we've got something that we could solve with more resources, I think would be my first thought on that. So, you know, if we've got some stats that show that crime is either flat or it's going up or it's going down across Wychavon, or relative to other rural groups we're not doing so well, then I think that would be a good message then to the exec board to say, yeah, we need more money, or we need to sort of reprioritize. But without that, I think it would be difficult to sort of put a case together. So if that information is already available, then obviously I think we should look at it. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Alan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to echo, really. I found it a very, very interesting presentation, and a great insight into an area, I suppose, that as a resident, you don't normally get an awful lot of information about. So I think the idea from Councillor Day as well about putting something in the Wychavon magazine, maybe more widely about what the team does and so on, would be of great interest to people. So thank you for that. The sort of specific question I was going to ask, and I hope I'm not treading on your toes, Aaron, but it was about fly tipping as well. And it was really just wondering whether there had been an increase in fly tipping over the last sort of 12 months. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about fewer people being around and that leading to more opportunities for that, and whether that's something that we'd seen in this district or not.
Amanda, did you want to pick up that question?
I'm happy to take that one, Chair.
Well, go ahead. Yep.
I think the simple answer is yes, there has been an increase. I think just this quarter, in the first 2 quarters, 664 reports of fly tips. For the same period last year, it was just 474. I think I had conversations with Phil during the first lockdown around household recycling sites. Did that have an impact? Quite possibly, but I also think that there were other things. A lot of the waste that is reported is green waste, so which makes investigation really, really difficult. But yeah, the increase is there, and it's something we're aware of. I had a conversation with partners at Alney Parish Council yesterday, and I was talking about the scrap fly tip campaign there. It's something that they've trialled for us and trialled really well. And they asked the question about what if the parish council brought more trail cameras for us as a district council. No, I don't think we need more trail cameras, because the reality is that of the nature of our districts, they are very rural, and there is always going to be opportunity for fly tippers. So what we need to do is we need to flip back to what Amanda said earlier in the presentation and raise awareness of our residents, those residents that want to do the right thing, and just remind them of their duty of care and make sure that if they are paying somebody to take their waste away, it's a licensed carrier. I think what Aaron, forgive me, Mr. Parker from Alney Castle said yesterday is they've meeting with every property in Alney Castle around scrap licensing, and he was quite clear with me that he doesn't believe the waste is coming from there. I don't believe fly tippers tip on their doorstep. So clearly, Alney Castle residents are very aware of our scrap campaign. They're aware that if somebody's taking their waste away, they need to be checking for waste carrier license. They need to be asking the question, where's it going? They need to be asking for receipts. Alternatively, use our bulk waste collection service. So it's about raising awareness, but there's potential for us to use services already available. So back to the original question, yes, there has been an increase.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. You're just so you're aware, your mic's a little bit echoing. We're not sure we're getting everything, so I think we probably just caught all of that. The bit I was going to, I can see I've got hands up. The bit I was just going to note on fly tipping. So with another hat on, I've been part of the council's budget scrutiny group this year, looking at the budget proposals. So just for information, one of the recommendations that we are making back to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee next week is that we remove the discretionary discount for paying the fine within 10 days in the event that you are issued a fixed penalty notice for fly tipping, and then actually pay full price from day one, because frankly, it shouldn't be happening. So we're proposing that that discount should be removed. And we have also suggested that we consider additional investment in enforcement on fly tipping as one of the investment areas that we should look at. So it's certainly something that's called attention at the level of the budget group as well. But if the executive board is minded to accept that recommendation, then that would see that reduction disappear, and anyone caught fly tipping would be expected to pay the full amount from the start. I've seen Nicholas and Chris and Tony. So Nicholas first.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. I couldn't quite hear Rob Rich's comments, and I might repeat it, but on the question of fly tipping, it's obviously responsibility of the householder who gets rid of the rubbish as well. I think you probably made that point, but I don't think many people around here, certainly in the rural parts, know that. And I think that information, which I think, Amanda, you were going to put on posters and things, I don't think that was sort of forgotten since the meeting last March. It'd be useful, I think, if local people knew their responsibilities, if that hasn't already been covered. And I think the other question I have is that communications are really important, and Chris's point about putting it in Witch Havens magazine, I think is that, because certainly in this area, most information is by word of mouth. We don't get police reports anymore about theft, for instance. So I think there's just got to be an increase in communication so people know what they can do. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Chris?
Thanks. In a similar vein, I don't know if these numbers are available, but I would have thought actually publicising the fact that there are trail cameras, even obviously not the specific locations, but the fact there are, and of how many prosecutions have arisen from them, could actually give quite a good indication that, you know, to those who might be thinking of fly tipping, that there is a good chance that they could be caught, and generally just sort of a raising awareness and confidence that something is being done about it and that these can be effective. So I would suggest in any communication that maybe those specific numbers could be put in if they're available.
Thank you.
Chairman, if I may. So again, just to reiterate some of the comments that Rob's made that might not have been captured, is that, you know, in the presentation I made reference to Q1 and Q2. So half the year we've received 735 environmental reports, which encompasses a whole raft of reports, from dog fouling to graffiti to littering to fly tipping. You won't be surprised to know that a high proportion of those are fly tipping, so it equates to 664. So we're on course for the year of circa 1,500 reports that will be dealt with. If I compare that to the same period last year, so bearing in mind we've had 664 in this year for half year, we had 474 last year, so we're already 200 up on the same period last year. So, you know, the message is, the evidence is clear, isn't it? Sadly, it's only going in one direction. I think COVID impacted on that, because I think there was a significant amount of serious organised crime that happened as a consequence of people being off the roads. I also think that there was a consequence of the fact that the refuge, the tips were closed, that also had an impact, and we certainly see the impact of that elsewhere in the country, where there was some significant headlines, wasn't there? But absolutely, my message in my presentation was about the need to amplify and raise awareness of what individual duties are in relation to how do you dispose of your waste. So, you know, they can't use ignorance as an excuse. And the second part of that is about being very clear that, you know, we've got a zero tolerance to fly tipping in our district, and that then reinforces and this is the sort of enforcement action that you can expect to receive. And it's, for me, it's music to my ears, Aaron, that actually you're looking to make that recommendation to Executive Committee, because my personal view is that I think fly tippers get away with it, because I think actually the penalty is disproportionate to the risk. So what you will see is you will see serious organised crime people going, do you know what, it's worth the gamble of me maybe getting hit for 200 quid every now and again. And we know, don't we, that our districts are more vulnerable than most because of the fact of the rural nature and the fact there are many areas that could be potential for fly tipping. So any opportunity and advice that you have about how we amplify that using our marketing channels would be gratefully received. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Amanda. Tony, will you indicate anything?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I'd like to echo, first of all, Chris's view that, Chris's comment that I found this presentation extremely helpful, informative, and thank you all for making the presentation. Apologies now, because I'm going to come to a couple of specifics, and Amanda almost invited me to raise one, so I'm going to raise it. One is in relation to fly tipping, and the other is related to COVID and problems of gathering. So it'll be addressing that to Tanya to a certain degree. But the first one on the fly tipping, I've experienced in the ward that I represent, which covers this specific incident covers 3 parishes actually, which is quite concerted fly tipping, and I think Rob's team are going to go and have a look at this in open countryside. It's a specific problem in an area where it is very open and whilst and involves landowners, major landowners and multiplicity of landowners as well, and how you secure a rural area to stop easy access for fly tippers is one of the major issues there. Rather interestingly, certain residents have actually been looking through some of the fly tipping, and we do have evidence within there with a name and address on it. It's a bank statement, and so hopefully something will come out of that one, at least a little bit of evidence there. And it is somebody local, despite the fact that we say these things come from a distance. This is somebody not that far away. But I'll await Rob's investigation into that and see where we go. But you know, I'm confident in the teams that we've got and the services we've got that we'll resolve that one and come up with a plan, because I think that's the important thing, as well as sorting out the specific issue, is looking at a plan. How can we make that area better secure so it's not quite so hospitable to allowing continued fly tipping. The other issue I wanted to raise, again, it's something that's only just come up this last week or so, and this is addressed really to Tanya, is a COVID situation of people travelling some distance into the rural areas, and specifically to Breeden Hill. I'm aware the police have had some work on Breeden Hill, challenging people. I'm not sure whether Tanya's been involved with that, but challenging people, you know, where are you coming from? The specific incident we have, which covers my ward, is the village of Elmley Castle. Last Sunday was absolutely full of parked cars right up the main street, where clearly people had been driving from outside the area into Elmley Castle, using that then as access up to Breeden Hill. It's a type of problems that we may have in certain parts of our rural area, where there are tourist attractions or attractions where people you know, can travel some distance and come and park. The problems there, of course, is the impact on the village and parking up the main street, and the concern that social distancing is creating, or lack of social distancing is creating a problem within a village where they've had 1 or 2 incidents of coronavirus problems, including somebody that sadly died recently within that village. and so it's very sensitive at the moment, and the community is sensitive, and it's what action is being taken to areas like that, and it's something I suspect is ratcheting up, but that's really addressed to Tanya as to what we're doing in areas like that.
Thanks, Tony. Tanya, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. I did see the email earlier, and I've already forwarded that to the local team, who have already raised concerns around that area in any case. I've also taken it up to the Gold Group for you to ask the question, because it's not only there, it's across the board, across the whole of the rural section, as to what is the definition of local travel. Is that within miles? Is that within a district? Gold Group have come back to me, so I have got a response. Not that it's extremely helpful, unfortunately, because obviously the government haven't been very clear around it, and we've got to just go with what guidance the government are giving us. And the answer really is, if it's guidance, it's not law. So guidance is, we've just got to police by discretion, really, and follow the 4 E's. Obviously, if it's law and there is a definite COVID breach, as in a gathering, no social distancing, then we will tick it, and we will go quickly to that stage now. It's not like in the earlier spring, whereby we tried to police by coercion, if you like, and by consent. We're now going more towards ticketing. I am informed, and confidently informed, that the government are reconsidering their guidance around local travel. But my understanding of it, and the one that I've instilled in my teams, is that local would not be, for example, to travel from a different county, albeit if they were just over the border in that area from Gloucester, but from a fair distance to come to that village. It would be somebody who is relatively local. If they're impinging any traffic parking infringements there, obviously we'd be looking at that, and obviously if there's social distancing, then we've got no concerns whatsoever by moving people off and encourage them to go elsewhere where the parking is available and which is more local to where they're from. We will be stopping people basically, and we'll be asking them what their intentions are, where they're from, and we will deal very robustly with any COVID breaches. So please be assured, I've put that onto our COVID patrol response. We've got 2 officers, at least a double crew, who go around the whole of the area. They are dedicated to doing it every single day. They're paid through overtime, which is provided through the COVID funding, and they will concentrate on all these areas. I've put it on the plan today, that area, so we will be looking at it along with my own team, of course. So all I can say is, please keep flagging at the issues. I will take it all forward. We'll keep asking the government to give us more clarification. They are actively considering it now. I'm hoping that they'll move on and consider it further. And as you probably noticed today as well, Scotland have changed some of their rules, and as a rule, generally, if Scotland do, Boris usually follows. So I'm hoping very much that the restrictions will become stricter, because clearly there is an issue and we are very keen to address it. We feel it from the police point of view. We've got so many other officers now that are self-isolating or have got symptoms, and obviously we are doing our best to police it as well at the same time. So it is high up on our agenda and really important to us. So please be assured we're on it. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Tanya. If I may, Aaron, just say thank you very much for that. It's most helpful.
No problem.
Stephen, I can see you indicating.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing me. I mean, just to really back up Councillor Rowley, what Tanya says, we have last 2 weeks I've held a district IMT, which is where we get partners together, and this issue of tourist attractions and people coming in from across the county has been picked up. We flagged this with WRS, who deployed the marshals, and Tanya and I, as earlier this week, actually had an email exchange about some hotspots that we'd like the police and WRS to work on. So please be assured that it is something that is in hand, and we are on top of working with both the police and WRS.
Thanks, Stephen. And Phil, I can see you've raised your hand.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate Tanya's problem and the policing problem with it. It's, the communication's not great, is it, in terms of enforcement bit. It was just a little bit following on back in the spring, I know with Penelope Bossum in the Overbury Estates, where again was similar issues in terms of people gathering and going on the hill. We provided the posters that we use in our parks in terms of social distancing and regulations on that. what I'd sent across to Chris so he could provide Penelope was the latest version on it, which I think is probably more effective and clearer on that. And this conversation's kind of just made me think perhaps I'll share the poster that we put in the parks with this panel, and probably send that to all the parish councils, so that, you know, if parish councils want to deploy similar sort of signs, providing that you know, a guidance on the regulations, so that it might make people think a little bit about their actions on that. So I'll happily circulate that.
Thanks, Bill. That's very helpful. Amanda?
Thank you, Chairman. And just to come back to Tony's original comments in relation to fly tipping, my key message to all members and anybody that will listen to me is report it, report it, report it. So that was a really good example. I saw the images in an email today, and it looked like it was a significant fly tip, which makes you think, how long has it been there? We've got officers that are going to be looking at that today. I think that's music to our ears, that there's evidence, because absolutely we'll do that investigation, and where we've got evidence that we can then use enforcement action, we will absolutely do that. I think the other element for me is around that reiteration about working in partnership with others. So acknowledging that that's on private land and farmers' responsibility, and that in terms of the legislation, if it's a private landowner's responsibility, it's their responsibility to remove. But we know, working with our communities, that sometimes that's very difficult. And actually, so we've got a role to play about how we work with those landowners to support them about finding solutions, so then they don't become the victims of crime. And that's why the relationship with Tanya's rural and business team is really important in terms of identifying security measures. And that's why the role of our community safety officer in terms of providing that reassurance support, but also being very clear about their responsibilities, is also really important. So that then, supported by the scrap campaign, for me, sort of completes the picture in terms of the offer. Thank you, Chairman.
Great, thanks, Amanda. That's really helpful. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on the presentation? Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but would it be appropriate for this group just to express our appreciation for the work that Amanda and her team and Tanya and her team have done over the last period, recognising that obviously there's been some exceptionally challenging circumstances that you've been facing, and I, for one, have felt pretty secure as a resident of Wychavon, and so I'd like to say thank you for that. And I just wonder if, as a group, we might want to do that.
I think that's certainly appropriate, and I think we're well within our rights to do so, and I think we should. So absolutely, I think we all echo that sentiment. Well done, and thank you. We'll move on the agenda. I think we sort of segued neatly into this, actually, in terms of item 6, which is in relation to support for towns and villages in the post-COVID economy. Amanda, Tanya, Rob, you're very welcome to stay and participate if you wish to, but equally, I'm conscious that you may well have other things to do, and you're very welcome to drop off at this point if you'd like to. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll give you a Zoom wave.
Thank you.
Thanks
Cheers all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just in terms of this item, this item follows on from a debate at Council on the 2nd of December that Councillor Lawrence Smith initiated. And what I thought I'd like to do, if it's all right, is ask Councillor Smith just to say a few words about sort of what prompted that debate, and then reflections on that debate. And then, if it's okay, Phil, I'll pass over to you in relation to the note that was circulated just a little earlier this afternoon, if you could perhaps just provide a little insight into that. And then we can have a broad discussion at that point. So over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I don't know whether all the panel members have had the opportunity to look at the note that Phil circulated, the Worcestershire strategy on recovery for the post-COVID world, however long that may be away. But not to steal too much for his thunder, I did think it was interesting to see that the topics picked up on in the strategy mirror a lot of the points that were raised by members at council back in December, including talking specifically and highlighting that the high streets in the town centres about business intelligence. So I believe one of the points that actually Councillor Eyre raised about surveying businesses and getting a grip of where we're at to begin with, both those feature in amongst the 7 areas highlighted in the strategy. And I think picking up on that in particular, that last point about the level of business intelligence that we have, it is interesting to see the scale of working from home that has gone on. I believe the note talks about almost 2/3 of businesses do have, across Worcestershire, have people working from home, and amongst them, around half have at least 4 out of 5 people working from home, which obviously for those of us representing rural communities, that there's potentially lots of strain on our connectivity, something which this panel discussed, I believe, this time last year. We had in the teams talking about 4G, 5G and about broadband connectivity. And coming out of the debate at council, this is one of the areas and highlighted in the minutes that I thought might become more important in the post-COVID economy. We highlighted already this time last year how important connectivity was, but I believe the evidence now just re-emphasizes how much the role connectivity plays in our future economies. One of the other areas, very quickly picking up on the strategy, is about the green recovery, something that's being talked about at a national level, but something again which this panel has highlighted and looked at in the past about agri-tech and how we're more able to efficiently provide assistance to our agricultural sector, using technology in particular. And I know we've had some interesting presentations in the past on that too. One of the things that really I would also like potentially members of this panel to discuss in terms of their experience as well is the level of how much footfall they see in their local village in terms of the use of local shops and local amenities. Certainly I found back in Wychbold, the feelings I get is that at least when we were going through the period of thawing in the summer of last year, and we were able to open up the pubs again and open up some of the local amenities again, there did seem to be more use of that from local people who were staying and working from home. So that whether that introduces potential opportunities in the villages for those business owners who might currently be struggling in the hospitality industry, but potentially looking 6 months, a year down the line, they could actually potentially have a higher custom from locals who have made a more permanent move towards working from home. But yes, not to steal any more thunder from Phil, it is, if you haven't had an opportunity to read it yet, it's a short strategy, but it's a very interesting one. And it covers some really interesting areas. And like I say, it touches on many of the points that we actually raised in the debate ourselves back in December.
Thanks, Lawrence, really helpful. Phil, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Aaron. To say it's interesting sort of revisiting this document and sending out this afternoon is, I think genuinely when we were working on this as multi-agencies back in June, July, in August, there probably was an expectation that we were moving into the recovery phase. I think hindsight has taught us that it's gone from recovery back to response, a little bit of a recovery in December, back to response stage now. So it's it's quite dated actually, some of the statistics in terms of what businesses were saying, but I think it sort of outlines the challenge. Apologies, it was only sent out this afternoon, so you've not had time to see it. I'm quite happy to go through it, a little bit of a summary, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because I'd be quite interested really in terms of the experiences of the panel members and your thoughts on it, as I say, because there's no doubt we'll have to revisit that. There's a meeting next week Friday where we're revisiting the recovery plan and what's needed to take into account the latest changes. But very quickly running through it in terms of priority areas of work, I think before I start it is just to say Worcestershire, we work really well as agencies. I have to say the contact between agencies is pretty impressive, and I know the LGA have done a peer review in terms of our response to COVID, and I think they were quite delighted actually in terms of the experience that we had. So back in the end of March, April, there were twice weekly multi-agency calls on the economy to sort of, people like the Job Centre Plus, Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, the NFU actually have been very, very involved in it, having those regular meetings. So it was sort of twice weekly, moved into weekly sort of come the end of spring, over the summer period. We probably went into fortnightly meetings, and we're at fortnightly at the moment, but I suspect we'll get into weekly meetings again quite shortly. So in business intelligence is quite key to it. So those are some statistics. So within Worcestershire, Chamber of Commerce are probably the best placed organisation for doing regular surveys of membership in businesses in there. So that on page 3 really is a summary of where we were at that stage. I suspect we've probably not moved very far from that now in this lockdown 3. So it's quite frightening when you hear that you've got 50% of businesses returning the survey saying they're in survival mode. That's quite a startling statistic there in Lawrence. I think you're right in picking up on some of those working from home statistics that came from that. So that information would have been updated since then. And we'll continue on that. And on the next page 4, we also obviously had EU exit. So that was in the exit period. So at the same time was getting businesses prepared for Brexit taking place on the 31st of December. So just to sort of make that point, that was kind of trying to get information flow in support to businesses. Both COVID and EU exit kind of took place over certainly the autumn winter period. The business support, whole range there of activity. What I have to say is, in terms of Wychavon District Council's response to it, I think a key element of that is we've been central to distributing government grants to our small business community, and I have to say it's one hell of a scale of grant provision that I never thought we would ever be spending this sort of money previously, and I hope we don't have to spend it in the future, to be frank. In lockdown 1, Wychavon allocated government money, mind you, £32.5 million to our business community. So to thousands of our businesses, we distributed that funding, I have to say, fairly quickly, certainly quicker than many local authorities. Lockdown 2 in November, that was £1.4 million distributed to the hotel, retail, leisure sector, and we had 349,000 discretionary funding to distribute to other businesses. We still have some additional discretionary funding that we will be getting out the door over the next few months on that. And we will be distributing now, details to be confirmed, lockdown 3 grant funding again for the retail, hospitality, leisure sector that have been forced to close down. So those payments will start to roll hopefully shortly on that. So that's taken up a lot of our staff resource, I have to say, and I would say Chris Brooks in particular has been leading on that piece of work, and particularly on the discretionary fund has been an area of focus of his time, and still is a focus of his time in lockdown 3 will mean that we rolling that out again. So quite a lot of business support element to it. County councils also has its own grant funding support. We have what's known as the Worcestershire Business Central, which provides a lot of the training and support provision and response to questions from businesses in Worcestershire, which is an agency that's kind of funded through the public sector, so Wychavon is a funding partner of that group. And that they've really geared up their support. A lot of online training and advisory services that they've provided over the year, really. Transport and infrastructure, I think the key element there was the government was keen that we actually got on in to make sure that projects that were in the pipeline or under construction continued, to actually bring forward some of that activity on that. So a number of schemes there I'd like to flag, and particularly looking at Liz there, that Pershore Northern Link pleased to say that's been flagged as a project to make sure that happens, and to help the economy during this difficult time. And dare I say it, sorry, going back to that, after what Lawrence said, Worcestershire 5G. So I know there are many communities that would be happy with 3G, let alone 5G. So yes, in that context, we've got to make sure don't just look at the future technology, look at today's basic technologies to make sure that's rolled out across the county. Employment and skills, and let's be frank, the economic impact is probably more clearly demonstrated by unemployment figures. We get monthly unemployment figures, and just looked at the last ones that came out in December. If you look at the unemployed was 3,380 for Wychavon in November 20, that compared to 1,230 a year before. So you're not quite tripling, but not far off tripling the unemployment within 1 year, and that's just an unprecedented level of growth. And it's not lost on me that furlough is hiding a lot more of that latent unemployment, I'm afraid. So that's now been agreed, which I think has been a lifesaver. I have to say, the furlough being extended to the end of March. So I think it's going to be a long time until April, May before we really, assuming furlough doesn't get extended further then, before we really understand in terms of unemployment in jobs quite what the level of impact is. But I think it's severe is probably the mildest version of that. So on employment and skills, a lot of effort to put in a jobs match helpline across the county. So again, County Council very much leading on that, along with the LEP and a careers helpline, because it's particularly, unemployment is particularly at the young age. So sorry, I haven't got the figures to hand, but typically, as I say, our unemployment across the population is 4.5%. Across Worcestershire for 18 to 24-year-olds, it's around 10%. It's 9, it's certainly the late 9% level. So it's young people that's taken a substantial brunt of the COVID impact. So quite a bit of support went in the summer and in autumn to try and improve matching people looking for work with employers. And there are employers that have been looking for recruitment. And I have to say, after having years and years of employers struggling to recruit in skill shortages, etc., this does create an opportunity for some of those growth businesses to actually improve their employment levels. Town centres, I know you're the rural panel, but a lot of focus has been on the town centre work, and we've got a town centres action plan for Wychavon, and I won't dwell too much on that, but it's sort of stop go, a little bit in terms of the town centres work. And likewise tourism, as I say, tourism, massive part of the rural economy on it, and it does feel like it's stop go. And the messaging, our previous discussion, I can't believe myself as somebody who's been in economic development for 30 odd years is we're actually encouraging people not currently to come into the area to do the walking and cycling and those sorts of activities that we would normally be encouraging and promoting. But that's a sign of the times we're in at the moment. But when we do get to that recovery phase, whether that's April, May, we've got to be ready to actually promote it. And I think there are quite a number of positives. Sorry, I'm trying to find positives where I can. I think inevitable impact of COVID is I think people will be less reluctant to get on aeroplanes and in the future. So I think the ability of increasing staycations, that staycation certainly happened at a fairly high level back in the summer period, in those halcyon days when I think if anybody had self-catering accommodation in particular, I think they were pretty busy during the summer on that. And even if COVID isn't quite the threat it is today, in the spring and summer going forward, I think people will still be a little bit more careful, and there'll be a good number of customers, I think, that will be wanting to do rural holidays in years to come on that, particularly on the self-catering side. So our tourism officers and tourism support needs to be there to make the most of those opportunities. So that's a summary of it. Quite a lot of work behind it, and that strategy, likewise, behind each of those sections, there's an action plan behind that as well. So there is a lot of detail on that. But I'll shut up now and just sort of really hear what the views are of the panel members and what you think we should pick up going forward.
Thanks, Phil. That's very helpful. Any initial questions or comments? I can see Tony and then Chris. So Tony first.
Sadly, a lot of businesses will obviously go out of business, but that void will also be the opportunity for other people coming in, new starter businesses. What are we doing in terms of being ready for new starters and assistance that we might be able to give them? I just wonder what we're doing as a council.
Yeah, a very good point, Tony. I think my experience is that whenever you do get economic turbulence and people being made redundant, a fair number of those actually go to set up their own businesses. They use the knowledge, experience that they've had in their market to actually find, be a little bit more self-reliant in setting up businesses. So there's been a boost to the business support training available in Worcestershire. We've provided in the past some grant funding to encourage people to do that startup training, and that's been specifically been European Social Fund funded ways of doing that. And the way that fund existed is it only largely supported business to business startups, and didn't like to support basically businesses to consumers, to avoid the retail sector, to the hospitality accommodation side of things. I think those sectors actually, in retail, quite frankly, has been massively, probably one of the worst hit sectors. And I actually think there will be people that will, fill the void, particularly for the national companies, retail companies that are closing down. And which even credits to ourselves really is we've agreed to put funding into a Worcestershire-wide delivery of business startup schemes, so that grant funding for people looking to set up in those business sectors will be available. There's also a property for some businesses, they can operate from home straight away, and that's a lot of that activity. But some businesses will need some accommodation, so a very proactive role that Wychavon's taken is we've got starter units at Val Park that we're already on track, and we had a private sector investor lined up to build those 10 small units. The investor back in March, April, when COVID first hit, kind of had the nerves, kind of understand that, and stepped back and didn't get on with the construction that had been geared up. Wychavon, we decided we will step in and we would fund that work. So we've got 10 new small units being completed at the moment on Val Park. And taking Tony's point, actually the level of interest in those units is pretty strong. So, the headline figures, you might think this is a bad time to be building industrial units. The reality is this is probably the best time to be building, and I think we will do pretty well out of that. And surprise, surprise, the investor has suddenly come back to us and said, "Oh, I quite like to invest in the scheme now." But we kind of took some of that risk. Likewise, at the Civic Centre at Pershore, we are later this month going to start converting some of our vacant office space into a business hub. So it provides space for businesses either to rent some small offices there, or particularly to use hot desking arrangements. Hot desking may not be probably the right thing at the moment to be doing because of COVID, but let's hope in the spring and summer that's a type of activity that people will do. In a way, we've had to do home working the last 9 months more than I've ever done and ever expected I would do. And I think we have a better appreciation now that if you are a small business working from home, actually that social integration and having a bit of contact, having a bit of support mechanisms that you can rely on is quite important. So that space at the Civic Centre will help to try and play that void. And we'll work with property owners, and part of our challenge is make sure that we're delivering those sorts of products across the district, including the rural parts.
Thanks, Phil. Chris?
Thanks. I realise this report's about COVID, and I think it's an excellent response across the board and so on. But I'm just conscious of the other big issue around the moment, which is the impact of post-Brexit, particularly on the horticultural and the food processing and transport industries. And I wonder if, because particularly bear in mind the significance of those within Wychhaven, and thinking in terms of the business-facing side of the activities that Phil's just been talking about, I'm wondering whether there will be scope to actually have a more integrated set of offerings, if you like, to businesses coming forward, which take account of the problems and hopefully actually opportunities resulting from the changed logistics and growing needs and what presumably will actually be quite a rapid, significant increase in demand for UK grown fresh produce. I'm wondering if the cause may be different, but there may be a number of businesses in the Vale for whom the issues are actually mixed up and the responses might need to be integrated.
Yeah. I can only provide some direct feedback from my ward, as you know, is relatively heavy in terms of horticultural businesses, and having visited one, spent a lot of time in one last Friday, they were reporting in general, actually, COVID has presented opportunities that were perhaps not there previously, given the scale of demand, and they have seen and exploited opportunities. They did reference Brexit, and it wasn't so much in terms of as creating issues directly for them as a grower, I suppose, from supply, because clearly they're supplying themselves, but they did reference issues around clarity of rules around haulage and transportation seemed to be the biggest issue. It was, discovering that you needed a piece of paper that you didn't know you needed yesterday seemed to be causing the biggest issue.
Yeah. Perhaps if I'd sort of add is, in terms of the wider economic strategy, the local enterprise partnership, Worcestershire LEP, probably are the strategic body in Worcestershire for economic development, and they are in the processes of updating their strategic economic plan and what's known as a local industrial strategy for Worcestershire. So that work is underway at the moment, and I think that should pick up those sorts of points quite significantly on that. And I'm half expecting, I don't think I'll be in trouble, Tony, saying this, in Chris, that I can say I think the leader, Bradley, has actually said in meetings, hasn't he, publicly, that we will be looking to do an economic strategy for Wychhaven over the summer, to take a little bit of that COVID. Again, this is hope, is that we kind of understand the impact of COVID a little bit more. Hopefully we understand the impact of Brexit a little bit more. And I think with Brexit, same with COVID, it brings its challenges, but it also brings some opportunities along that way. One of the Brexit impacts is one of our nurseries in Worcestershire, in Wychhaven, is stopped getting its supply of plant plugs from Holland. So that's kind of curtailed some of their activity for this year, but one hopes that they'll actually look for a more local supply of those plugs. So there are opportunities there, and the fact that we do have our glasshouse industry had a lot of investment in recent years in the UV lights to try and grow tomatoes 12 months of the year is that supply, you know, that food security. I think it had been a big issue before Brexit, but I think going forward would be even more of an issue. So there will be opportunities.
Yeah, I would endorse that. I think I'm convinced that as the months unfold now, as we'll see quite significant changes in the whole value chain in perishable food. I think we're not only just seeing the tips, the plugs of it now, if I can do it that way. I think there's going to be a lot of upside opportunity. I mean, just looking around Harvington, you know, there are large numbers, hectares and hectares of glass houses, which under current technology appear to be idle during the winter. I'm sure that there is technology available which could actually bring those into productive use at this time of year and others. And I suspect that there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the Vale. And it's that linkage of opportunities that horticulture may have difficulty in responding to, combined with the COVID disruption and so on, as I think could actually be quite interesting and challenging in the next few months. It may take 3 or 4 months for the pressures and the opportunities to become clear, but I think they could be very, very significant for the Vale. And I think in a year's time, we'll be able to see quite a lot of changes that have resulted from this first quarter. Thanks.
Indeed. I'm continuing the hands up. Phil, one thing I just noticed, I'll make a comment. One thing I noticed in the report, so there was a lot of reference to tourism, which I think is absolutely right. And obviously that has a knock-on impact in terms of hospitality. But I think one of the concerns that we've often expressed as a rural panel is about the vibrancy of our villages and the range of amenities that exist in our villages. One of those, so I think Lawrence has referred to some of the differentiation that's happened as a result of COVID. So perhaps some of the local shops are perhaps finding themselves more viable than they were previously because of the number of people going to them. And indeed, we have heard stories, certainly around the country, if not in Wychavon, and maybe examples in Wychavon, of pubs diversifying to do other things and operating shops as well. But I think there are examples of communities where the last remaining local amenity is the pub, and clearly, you know, dare I say it, pubs are being hit hard by the regulations and the shutdowns following the pandemic. So, you know, there is a substantial risk that coming out of this, you know, many pubs may not reopen, and therefore the last remaining amenity in villages will disappear. You know, do we have any intelligence around that? And, you know, is that something that that we should be looking into as an authority? You know, not so much from the somewhere to go and have a drink perspective, although some of us might enjoy that, but as much from the perspective of, you know, it is the last remaining village amenity in a number of our villages.
Yeah, we have intelligence in the sense of we've certainly done surveys around in terms of which pubs are providing takeaway services in sort of being innovative approaches to their business models, so that we can actually help promote it. I think I'll be honest, I don't sure that we know the sector well enough to know, you know, come spring, when we hope we will be able to return to pubs in numbers, how many of those pubs will actually be there at that stage. I wouldn't hesitate a guess on that, and maybe if you as members of your panel, if you can kind of have those discussions in your own communities to get a feel for you know, how you think your pubs will do. One of the papers that will come forward to the executive board in time is we have been allocated some discretionary funding from the government for business support, and certainly from an officer perspective, there's a bit of a view that you know, there could be the case for a bit more support for people like rural pubs that are, as you say, the sort of the only service in that community, that maybe we should focus some of our discretionary funds to actually boost those particular businesses to ensure that they're in a position to recover. So that might be for debate and discussion at an executive board going forward.
Thanks, Phil. Nicholas?
Well, coming back to that, it seems to me that pubs were declining anyway before COVID, and so I think if you're not careful, you support businesses that aren't viable in the first place. So I think there's a sort of a point to be made there that other businesses will come about, and certainly you asked about footfall of shops, local shops in rural. I think they've improved. Certainly farm shops in our area have increased their business, and the only thing that will probably stop them increasing is the cost. In other words, they charge generally more than if you went into a supermarket in the local town. But certainly they've increased their business as far as I can see.
Yeah. Lawrence, okay.
Not to in any way contradict Nicholas. He's certainly right in terms of the long run decline in pub custom and certainly number of pubs. But is there a potential for more specific surveying, let's say, of both pubs and village shops for their reflections on the last couple periods of recovery? As Phil, as you touched on, we've kind of gone from the period of response to recovery, and then back to response, and then to recovery again. Now we're in another response phase. But for those village shops and for those pubs who, as Aaron, I think rightly says, particularly on the pub front, are some of not just amenities in terms of hospitality and in terms of food and drink, but actually also function in some ways as community settings. You know, if you've not either got a village hall or a church hall, you may not even have one of them, and the only other alternative left is indeed a pub. But is there a potential for more targeted surveying of village shops, and whether there's a role for councillors to play in that, for assessing, right, how has your role slightly changed over the period of the last 18 months? And also, you know, looking forward, if you were to expect a more long run increase in the case of village shops, for example, you know, over the long run, you're expecting there to be a slightly higher on average customer that you're experiencing. What can be done to assist you in lowering certain logistics costs, and whether there is a role for the council to play in linking up village shops more closely to one another, let's say?
Just my reaction. Sorry, my reaction is, I think it's very useful to do a bit of survey work. You're right, actually, in terms of local community shops of what have they've learnt. And you know, I'll be honest, the resource that we've had on providing support have been town centre focus. And you know, I think a little bit of survey work and understanding what's worked, what the challenges are for rural retail businesses would be useful intelligence to get. In the current climate, I think it probably is best done at the local level, in terms of having to maybe using ward members or local contacts to actually sort of have that discussion with those outlets, and actually getting them to complete a bit of information and understanding where we can help in support. And you know, there are, I know from my local shop, and it's a suburban estate rather than a rural estate, but that shop should become the real hub, and their business model today is very different than the business model a year ago, and I think they will stick with that business model going forward. And that's that little bit of understanding what have others done, what can we do to support it and share good practice and spread that message. But given our travel restrictions at the moment, I think that's probably best done at the local level. Pubs, I suspect we will struggle at the moment in terms of contacting, again, if we did it centrally, actually with pubs closed, ringing around and trying to get answers to questions is a struggle. So again, at the local level, in local contacts, that would be really helpful.
If that's the case, would it perhaps be possible to just come up with a short sort of list of maybe no more than say 5 or 6 questions that you think would be relevant from it, or members to ask, and we could perhaps circulate that with one of the sort of leaders' messages, perhaps on a Friday, the normal end of week leaders' messages that go around to members, with a sort of a quick questionnaire to say, could you perhaps try and establish the answer these questions in respect of local pubs and shops in your wards. And we might not get full coverage, but we might at least get some, which will give us some intelligence.
Yeah, if you as a panel want to support that, I'll happily put a bit of time and effort into it.
Is that something we would support as a panel? I'm getting nods, not seeing any shaking of heads. So okay, yeah, if we could, Phil, that'd be great. Okay. Any other questions or comments specifically on this item, Alan?
Yeah, just very quickly, Chairman, thank you. I noticed on page 5 a requirement for additional support in some areas around manufacturing. I don't know if that is still the case or not, recognising that this document, or things have moved on since this document was originally put together. But certainly on the smart factory concepts, the organisation that I work for is leading the National Smart Factory Innovation Hub pilot work. So if you'd like to have a conversation about that outside this, then I'd be very happy to put you in touch with appropriate people on that side of it. And also very much around supply chain resilience is another key area that we work in. So again, I'd be happy to discuss that further if appropriate.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan, on that. I think on the smart factory bit, it's the 5G is one of those unique sort of projects in Worcestershire. So I know Worcester Bosch are very much leading on the sort of how you can use 5G to actually improve their productivity at their plant. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. And just on that wider point of connectivity, so not 5G specifically, but on connectivity, we're coming on to, I think, in the next item, the work plan. But for our next meeting in March, we are intending, or we have, I think, already invited Openreach to come and talk to us. We have no powers to compel them to come and talk to us, but I think we have previously heard from officers and from colleagues, the LEP and others, about the plans around connectivity and the requirements around connectivity, but we haven't yet heard from one of the key suppliers, and so, well, the main supplier, I suppose, in terms of the national picture. So we are inviting them to come and talk to us about what their plans are and how they intend to meet the various connectivity targets that they have been given within Wychavon. So I'm hopeful they might attend, but we can't make any promises. Elizabeth?
That would be very helpful because, they've got this project out where people can bid in, businesses and homeowners, to have a different network than the copper to the cabinet, etc. And one of my villages was particularly keen on that. And just at the sort of 2 minutes to midnight, all of a sudden, the rules were changed and they themselves lumped in quite a lot of rural places that were sort of left over, that didn't have a group to go with, and completely made the project unviable. Now I'm working with the Worcester County Council to try and unpick that, but it's so unhelpful to have got everybody G'd up, money raised, everything was going to go together, and suddenly they changed the rules to their needs.
Yeah, and I have a similar story, well, a different example, but in my ward, where an alternative provider was just starting to make inroads in terms of getting people to sign up with the possibility of having fibre to the premises added. And at the point that the conversation started, all of a sudden Openreach appeared and suddenly declared that they were going to deploy fibre to the premises to the new builds within the village, which of course suddenly drastically reduces the number of potential customers for the alternative supplier, and means that in effect, most of the village will not get fibre to the premises because of the sudden intervention of Openreach. So, it's almost
similar sort of thing.
Yes. So I think it would be very helpful if they were to attend and we could ask them some questions. Okay, it sounds like we're moving on from that, the item on post-COVID, but that was really helpful, Phil. Thank you very much for coming along and talking to us about that. And if you could think about drafting just 5 or 6 questions that we could get members to ask around local shops and pubs, I think that would be useful from an intelligence perspective for the council as a whole.
Okay, no problem, thank you.
That takes us on to the work plan. Now I know a version of the work plan was circulated with the agenda. I believe we've had a couple of additions, have we, since then, Tracy? I'm getting thumbs up from Tracy. So those will be added. That's like Tracy can't speak. Those will be added in.
Sorry. Yes, Aaron. Yeah, I've got 2 mice here, one for my PC, and I picked up the wrong mouse, and the one for my laptop. But yes, yeah, we've so it's a draft work plan. So the one I circulated with the agenda, I've had an update, and also I think Jem Stephen had sent a quick email around on his parts as well. So the latest one, I've had an update from housing. So it's really Chris, but understandably Chris is, you know, as we heard, he's got lots on anyway. So yeah, once we've got the rest of the information, then possibly you and I and Stephen can have a chat and put some dates onto it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have got some items there that we're planning with Chris, but of course some of them are not achievable in the current restrictions. So the visit to Pershore College, for example, which I think we're all keen to do, is not currently achievable, and we'll have to wait. The intention is that the next meeting will focus on the Rural Services Network Economy Toolkit, which is essentially a standard set of questions and suggestions of where to get data in order to collate a sort of a comprehensive picture of the rural economy in the district, with a view to then that informing the development of the rural economic strategy. So it sounds like there are plans for an economic strategy for the district to be created over the summer. And if we can get that toolkit compiled in March, or have some insight into how we can compile that toolkit, that will provide hopefully valuable data and insights for the work that's going to take place over the summer for the district as a whole. So that will be useful. And along with that, we will have, hopefully, as I said, Openreach to talk to us about where they are in terms of their various plans for rolling out fibre to the premises and improving connectivity. Are there any other items that members would wish to see added to the work plan that are not currently there? No, if there's none at this point in time, if you do have anything, you know, at any point, please do just drop Tracy or Stephen and I a message, and we're very happy to add things to the work plan to give us future items to focus on. That brings us to item 8, messages from the meeting. I think we should certainly reference the presentation that we've had on rural security and the work that's ongoing. I think it will be useful within that to specifically pull out the conversation about fly tipping and the significant increase in fly tipping that we've seen, but also the actions that we've suggested would support that. That would be very helpful.
Really useful. I think Alan mentioned thanks from this group, so it'd be worthwhile mentioning that in the feedback.
Absolutely, agreed. So I think fly tipping, thanks to the group. And then I think maybe reference to the conversation around the post-COVID economy, and in particular, the suggestion around local intelligence and us seeking to get local intelligence where we can. But also focusing on I think it is important that we construct that message in such a way as to recognise the opportunities as well as the challenges. Because I think certainly what we've heard from this panel is there are substantial opportunities arising at the moment. Okay, any other messages from the meeting? If not, that takes us to item 9, which is future meetings. So the next meeting is on the 17th of March at 4 p.m. again. And as we said, that will focus on the Rural Services Network Economy Toolkit and hopefully include a session on connectivity with Openreach in attendance if we can get them here. So we will we'll continue to push on that and see what we can do. And then the next meeting after that, just to make sure it's in your diaries, is on 26th of May. So that will follow. Okay. With that, I think that concludes our agenda. Is there anything else anyone would like to raise before we conclude the meeting? If not, my thanks again to Tracy in particular for pulling this together and keeping us on track. Tracy, there's a lot of work in the background to make sure this agenda actually happens. So thank you for that, Tracy. And also thank you to you, Stephen. I know you support Tracy in that and keep me honest. So thanks for your support as well.
No worries.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you all. And I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Chairman.
Right.